All right, the NFL Combine begins this week. Free agency is approaching, and I want to discuss here in the locker room, number one source for Texans digital content, the state of the Texans heading into free agency this year versus last, because it's very, very different. Last year, you had cap space that was near the top of the league. You were heading into just the second year of C.J. Stroud's rookie QB deal. You were 2 years, not 1 year away from having to pay not just C.J. Stroud, but Will Anderson. We always talk about, well, C.J.'s rookie deal is going to expire. Will Anderson's going to be one of the best young edge guys in the league. He already is a Pro Bowl player. We think he's only going to get better. So when we talk about C.J. Stroud and being eligible for an extension, I think Will Anderson comes into play as well. And now this year, you've spent some money. You're going to have to figure out what you want to do with Derek Stingley. He's extension eligible. C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson, they're a year away. So you don't have as much freedom. And I just want to talk about the Texans, the moves they made last year, how they impact the team moving forward. And let's just be honest, they've made some good moves when it comes to spending the extra money that comes with having a quarterback on a rookie deal. But the extensions that they've made, which are not going to be something that we go through in this video, but the extensions of the players that they already had just completely crumbled the opportunity of striking while the iron's hot with C.J. Stroud on his rookie deal, specifically the Shaq Mason, the Titus Howard, and the Dalton Schultz contract extensions. Not ideal, and they kind of limit you heading into free agency, which isn't supposed to be a deep area this year. Daniel Jeremiah tweeted this out, the great Daniel Jeremiah. He says, I've been reading about this free agency class for a few days, and it's making me even more fired up for the NFL scouting combine, which myself and Cody Stoots will be at this week. He says, not a lot, SNL, by the way. He says, not a lot of excitement on the used car lot this year. It's a good year to buy new. So he's basically insinuating there's not a lot in free agency, which is probably good for the Texans because they don't have as much money to spend as they did last year. And he's saying that the draft is the place where you develop players. And let's just be honest. The best way to overcome any cap limitations is by drafting well. You draft well, you overcome. The Texans drafted actually really, really well in the last two seasons, which should be something that's pretty encouraging. But let's look at the free agent moves they made last year. The new faces, not the guys that they brought back, but the new faces that they brought in last year, including one guy that they did bring back, but it was the first time that he actually agreed to a contract with the team. And we start with the most costly free agent of the Nick Caserio, DeMeco Ryans era, Danielle Hunter. You got him on a 2-year deal, so you maintained that status quo, and you signed him to a $49 million guaranteed contract. Think it worked out well. You let Jonathan Grenard go, but this is the type of move. You put him opposite Will Anderson, both of them Pro Bowl caliber players this year. The style of defense in which DeMeco Ryans plays, maybe Danielle Hunter opposite Will Anderson is something that he liked to see more than Jonathan Grenard. Paid off well, and it expires right as C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson are eligible for contract extensions. Now, the one thing about this that I will say is there's a chance that this time next year that edge guy is going to be one of the top needs. So perhaps, and I saw Jordan Reed, another great draft guy, said that this is the deepest D-line draft that he's seen in the last, I think, over a half decade. That might be an area that we're not talking about a lot right now that maybe the Texans think about because you can play those guys immediately, and maybe one of those guys can step in for Danielle Hunter because right now on the roster, there's not a long-term option opposite Will Anderson. Who knows? Maybe they bring back Danielle Hunter, but that was a good move last year. Then you had the DeMeco Autry move, which they liked. Nick Caserio described him as a badass. 34 years old, though. And you had the suspension, and then you had him kind of banged up throughout the season. They've emphasized how hard it was for him to get back on the field. A lot of times you could visually kind of see it in the Texans locker room, just how hard he was working to get back, like how much he was kind of wavering between games. Good luxury move. It paid off in some big situations this year, but creeping up on his mid-30s, this is a guy to watch when it comes to a potential cap casualty. In a perfect world, 3-4 years ago, this would be a perfect guy to have on your D-line. But if he's going to be banged up, he's not going to be available. You're going to have to wonder about this DeMeco Autry move. But for last year, it was a good move. And essentially, the contract might say 2 years. It could essentially just end up being a one-year deal where you could get some cap relief. Azeez Al-Shire, they let Blake Cashman go, much like they did Jonathan Grenard, to the same destination. Azeez was solid. He was good. A little bit of drama throughout the season. But I think he resembles and exemplifies everything that DeMeco Ryans and Nick Caserio want in this team. And they seem to be the kind of leaders that you want on the squad. And he's a very productive player when he's out there. Limitations in coverage. But Al-Shire, you got to say that was a pretty good move. And he's going to be a part of this thing for at least the next year. Now we're getting to the one-year deals. Neville Hewitt, $2.3 million one-year deal. One of your best special teams players. A guy who developed and became a better football player as a linebacker. He filled in nicely when he was called upon. Neville Hewitt, good signing. Now, the question is, though, like, does this turn into a situation where the guy goes from bargain to someone that they overvalue and they keep around too long? That's kind of where you find yourself in trouble. Like, you trade for Shaq Mason, good trade, and then all of a sudden you give him an extension and you essentially turn him into a bad free agency signing and a trade. Neville Hewitt, could they get Neville Hewitt back on a similar deal, or could they find another Neville Hewitt, a linebacker who can fill in accordingly? I think this is a guy that you would like to have on your team. You just don't want to pay too much for it. Jeff Okudah, pretty much what we've seen from Jeff Okudah. Not a starting quality corner in the NFL. I think this talk about potential, I think this was the final resting place for it. Jeff Okudah will find himself on NFL rosters. He might bounce around. He might end up playing for damn near a fourth of the teams in the NFL when it's all said and done. But the Texans were kicking the tires. Initially, you thought he would be cornerback 2. Luckily for them, they drafted Kamari Lassiter, and he was the unquestioned cornerback 2. Unable to stay on the field. Not great when he was on the field. Eventually, top early first-round pick. Didn't work out in Detroit. Didn't really work out in Atlanta. Didn't work out in Houston. You can move on from this. And these are just the type of moves where you kick the tires, and a lot of times the tire just goes flat. That's what happened with Jeff Okudah and CJ Henderson. Same type of vibe, same type of thing. Both of these failed first-round picks, busts, if you will. Did not work out. Low risk, medium reward. The low risk was there. There was really not much reward for either one of those guys. Miles Bryant, 1 year vet minimum. I actually thought he was better than Okudah and Henderson when he was on the field. Got a little bit of buzz during camp. I don't want to say a lot. He got a little bit of buzz during camp. Solid-ish player. I feel like you can find Miles Bryant's all over the place, but not a bad signing and better than the guys who, quote, had the high upside in Okudah and Henderson's. Derek Barnett, 1 year, $2 million deal. Perfect. 2 touchdowns. He is a guy that they found in the middle of the season 2 years ago. They liked him enough that they brought him back for a contract. If he wants to come back on that same deal, I don't see why not. But I also have a lot of confidence that this team can find guys like Derek Barnett. That was a perfect signing, guy that you could rotate in, as was Mario Edwards. Mario Edwards was one of the stars of camp. Now, going against that offensive line, hard not to look like a star. But when Autry was out, he did a nice job filling in. Then he got suspended. Mario Edwards, solid guy. Again, the Texans, I think they can find guys like Mario Edwards. And, he's on close to 10-year NFL vet. So maybe you can find a younger option. They signed Noah Brown to a 1 year, $2.6 million deal. I thought this was a good deal. 2023, Noah Brown, for like a 2 or 3 week stretch, performed as well as damn near any receiver in the NFL. CJ Stroud trusted him whenever plays broke down. Noah Brown seemed to be in the right place. Now, there's always been the case with Noah Brown, and that we saw that this year after the Texans released him, where he hasn't been able to stay healthy. But Noah Brown, when called upon, was good. Thought it was an interesting decision to release him in order to keep John Mechie and Xavier Hutchinson, because Noah Brown was light years better than those guys in 2023. 2024 when they had the opportunity to fill that void. They did not. Whenever a starting receiver was out, Noah Brown stepped up. Neither one of those guys did. I know you can point to it and say, well, he got injured, so it wouldn't have mattered. We don't know that he would have gotten injured here. Chances are he probably would have, but also would have been better to have Noah Brown on this roster than relying on Hutchinson and Mechie in situations. So it's a good contract and then an interesting training camp decision. Tommy Townsend, 2 years, $6 million, punter. Not bad. Cam Johnson did a really good job here. He ended up getting hurt in Pittsburgh. But Tommy Townsend, for the most part, good enough. 2 years, $6 million. Fatukasi, 1 year, $5.25 million. I don't want to call this a bargain. I would say this is just a solid deal. Another guy who had trouble staying on the field, but I think he's pretty underrated when he's in there. There's a reason when he came back late in the season, you kind of saw the defense still vibing. I think he's one of those guys, much like the Texans decided to get rid of Malik Collins because of what he may or may not have done on plays when it came to discipline as well as salary. I think Fatukasi is kind of the opposite of that. And he plays, I think he plays D-line like DeMeco Ryans likes him to play D-line. He's a nice compliment to the Anderson and Danielle Hunter duo. Then we have Tim Settle. This was one of their better moves. The Texans apparently were in on Eric Armstead. He ended up going to Jacksonville. I don't think they regret the way things went down. There was the big joke when they signed. I actually asked Tim Settle about this in the locker room. He kind of thought it was a little bit funny, but the Texans settled for Tim Settle. He was one of their best interior D linemen. Now, maybe he played a little bit more snaps than you would like for Tim Settle to play, but he brings a good energy to the team. He produced pretty decently on the field, a little bit of an edge, hell of a rotational guy. And at $3 million, you basically got 2 years of Tim Settle for the same price of 1 year of Fatukasi. I don't think you can really complain about that. You basically got 2 years of Tim Settle at the price of about a Jeff Okudah, 1 year of Jeff Okudah. Yeah, that's the type of moves that the Texans are going to have to make, but it's going to all start with the draft. It'll be interesting to see where they direct their attention. Wide receiver appears to be the most pressing need because of the Dell injury. We know about the interiors of both lines, but we also know the Texans, they don't just draft based on need. A lot of times they look 2 years down the line. They play chess instead of checkers. We saw that with Blake Fisher last year, drafting him when it appeared that they had tackles. They look really smart for doing that right now. So it's going to be interesting to see how they handle it. It's obviously a much different situation than it was last year. It's unfortunate that they kind of just threw away money on some of the extensions of the Mason, the Howard, the Schultz. But the one thing that they've shown is they can find guys at bargains and they can draft well, and they're going to need to because they don't have as much cap space this year as they did last year. What did you make of the Texans free agency last year? How much confidence do you have them having a moving this year? Is there anybody on that list that you think they must bring back? And is there anything on that list that you would like to take back? Subscribe, like, ride along. Always remember, when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in it together. We'll see you at the Combine, baby.